Boy, that 7D Mark II focuses like a dream. I am loving it. I'm here with a 600mm f4. It's actually a version 2 super telephoto. It's a great combination and offers amazing reach with the 7D Mark II, a 1.6x crop factor camera that gets me out to effective 960mm. And what's nice about the crop factor cameras is they're using the center part of the lens elements. We're actually sharper than with a full frame camera out to the edges. Even with 960mm, there's lots of times with bird photography when I need to get closer. So God invented teleconverters. I separate them either with a 12mm or a 25mm as here extension tube. Extension tubes are generally hollow spacers that can be used to reduce your lens's minimum focusing distance when you're working with subjects that are very close to the camera. But here I'm just using it as a spacer because you cannot mount the two together. So putting an extension tube between the two teleconverters allows me to mount them. Start with a 1.4x teleconverter, which will multiply our effective focal length by a factor of 40%, so it's a nice boost. Take off the covers, grab it, tighten the tripod head just a bit. Make sure to turn your camera off to minimize sensor dust, and then red dot to red dot, and you're good to go. The problem I have always is remembering to turn the camera back on. When you add a 1.4 teleconverter to an f4 lens, you reduce the maximum aperture to 5.6. So in effect, you've lost the stop of light, but with the Canon system, it's not really something that you need to consider because the loss of light comes out in the wash with the metering system. We're going to remove the 1.4x teleconverter or Tele-Extender now. Don't forget to turn your camera off. And more importantly, don't forget to turn your camera back on. And while we have the 1.4x teleconverter in my hand, or the EF Extender 1.4x3, it's a good time to mention that with the 200 to 400 with internal extender, you can be at 560mm with the 1.4x, the internal extender in place, and you can add an external extender to get you out to 784mm with a full frame body and get autofocus at f8 with most of the current camera bodies. So it's a great tip, especially if you're working with a single lens, to give you additional reach. And boy, the images are sharp as all get out. Now that we've taken a look at the 1.4x teleconverter, we're going to take a look at his big brother, the 2x teleconverter. Here's the 2x, and while we lose one stop of light effectively with a 1.4x, we're going to lose 2 stops of light effectively, and that's going to bring an f4 lens to f8. The great news is that pretty much all of the recent Canon camera bodies have the capability of focusing to f8. That was not true 3-4 years ago. Again, turn off the camera, mount the TC to the body, mount the TC to the lens, get your controls ready, and you'll notice here that with the addition of the 2x, that my rig has become back heavy. So every time I add a teleconverter to the mix, I'm going to rebalance. Really important for creating sharp images. And one of my favorite things is when I say to a student on an instructional photo tour, we'll loosen their tripod and the lens will go BAM! I'll say, hey, you need to rebalance that when you add a teleconverter. And they give me my favorite answer. Yeah, I know. Once we've added the 2x teleconverter to the 600 lens, working with a full frame body gets us out to 1200mm or 24x magnification. With a 1.6 crop factor camera like the EOS 7D Mark II, 1200 times 1.6 gets us out to 1920mm. Huge reach, and that comes to 38.4 magnification. Okie doke, we're going to try and do some of the cranes, the pairs of cranes feeding in the alfalfa field with the 7D Mark II, the 2x3 teleconverter, and the 600 II for the maximum focal length. When you put a 2x teleconverter on a lens, most folks think that the subject will be twice as big in the frame, when in fact the subject will be 4 times bigger in the frame, because the size of the subject in the frame is a function of the square of the focal length. The 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 LIS lens, along with a 2x teleconverter or a 1.4x teleconverter with any camera body, is a great starter rig for bird photography. When I'm working in conditions where it's bright sun and there's a chance for a big blast off, whether I'm at the beach and I'm working with terns or in New Mexico working with geese, I'm going to often add a 3-stop ND filter to the front of the lens. I use Stingray, really high quality, and that will get me 3-stop slower shutter speed. So even on a sunny day, I can put the 3-stop neutral density filter on and at ISO 50 get down to something like 1/8 of a second to create a beautifully blurred image. So all in all, the 70 to 200 2.8 version 2 is an incredibly versatile lens, both for beginning photographers and for experienced professionals. Teleconverters just give us extra focal length, extra reach, and with bird photography, that's what we want and need. There are some folks who say that it's not possible to make a sharp image with even a 1.4x teleconverter. And that is so out of space to me that it's hard to even comprehend. Going back 15 years, I began using 2x teleconverters with the big 600 and 500 millimeter f4L lenses, and I've never had a problem making sharp images with superb image quality and fine feather detail. So for me, teleconverters are as important as my lenses for bird photography. I can't tell you how many times I'm teaching in the field and I say to a client with a 500 millimeter lens, you'd be much better adding a 1.4 teleconverter to get the picture that you want. And they say, oh, I would, but I left it in the car. Your teleconverters belong in your pocket or your vest or a fanny pack, but only 100% of the time. They're vital accessories for all bird photographers.